In the beginning, God gave man two choices, the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Please read Genesis chapters 1 through 3. The typology used there is a foundation for the rest of Scripture. So what are these two trees, and what do they represent? They were both in the Garden of Eden, the first temple of God. God put Adam in the garden to dress it and keep it like the priests of Israel were to keep the tabernacle first built by Moses. Adam is a type of Christ, and Christ is our great high priest. The garden was a special place on earth, and from there mankind were to be fruitful and multiply. Like today, the church is a temple, and we individually are called temples, and we are to fill the earth with the gospel. Using typology, we see that our body is designed like the Garden of Eden. Please watch my video, Heavenly Anatomy. I explain it in depth. In Genesis chapter 3, we see that Eve chose the wrong tree. She chose a tree of knowledge. This tree represents her desiring more. God had given them all they needed, but the serpent convinced her she could be like God. Her eyes would be open, and she would know good and evil. Romans 3 verse 20 states, "The knowledge of sin is through the law." James 4:17, "If you know to do good and don't do it, it is sin." This tree represents the law or works. So what is this tree typology in our body? It's the brain, and its fruit is the pineal gland, located in the very midst of the brain between the left and right hemispheres. It is shaped like a pine cone. It produces melatonin and is responsible for our awake and sleep pattern, light and darkness. It is called the third eye, the eye of Horus, among others. Many cultures and religions talk of opening the third eye because at a very young age the pineal gland becomes calcified and hardens. 2 Corinthians 3 verse 3. This is like the law written on stone. By opening this third eye, they say one becomes enlightened and more spiritual. The brain also has 4 ventricles, or chambers of fluid. Let's look at the typology. Conifer trees produce cones, and most are evergreens. They can live thousands of years. They were told, "Thou shalt not die." Think of a pine tree and a Christmas tree. Many are shaped like a triangle. Think of the all-seeing eye and the pineal gland being awake. These trees have male and female cones. The female are higher up in the tree than the male. Remember, Eve was to be rolled over by her husband because she ate of the tree. She wanted to be above him instead of beside him. These cones are edible and they're seeds, but they are covered in scales. Think of the serpent having scales. The seeds are between the scales and are called naked seeds and can be seen when the scales are open, like Adam and Eve's eyes were open. Remember the Apostle Paul trying to enforce the law until God struck him with scales over his eyes? Once he realized the law brought death, he was baptized into new life. Paul realized his works could not save him. He needed faith in Jesus Christ, the promised seed of Genesis 3:15. They sewed fig leaves to cover their nakedness. To be naked means self-righteousness. All our righteousness are as filthy rags. Isaiah 64 verse 6. Conifer trees have needles for leaves. You can't make an apron with those. Somehow they use the needles to sew the fig leaves. Galatians chapter 4 verse 21 onward talks of the two covenants. The law leads to bondage, while the covenant of promise leads to freedom. Paul says to cast out the bondwoman. Adam and Eve were cast out of Eden. God said if they eat from this tree, they would die. In Exodus chapter 19, if they touched Mount Sinai when Moses went to receive the law, they would die. God would put enmity or hostility between the two seeds in Genesis 3:15. Read Galatians 4 verse 29. He that was born after the flesh or works persecutes him that was born of the Spirit. So tree number 2, What is it? What if Eve the bride had chosen it? God had finished his work of creation, and through faith they could have continued forever. Psalm 34, verse 8. Taste and see that the Lord is good. The tree of life is symbolized by our lungs, and our heart is the fruit. The heart lies in the midst of the lungs. It has 4 chambers, or heads, like the 4 rivers in Genesis 2, verse 10. Remember, the brain has 4 ventricles. Life is in the blood. Leviticus 17, verse 11. The river of life flows from God's throne, which is our heart, where God dwells. Revelation 22, verse 1. Ephesians 3, verse 17. Until Christ came, animal sacrifices were made, but once Jesus died on the cross, the sacrifices stopped. Why? Could it be that the fruit from the tree of life was finally chosen? Follow me. Galatians 3:13 states, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, being made a curse for us, for it is written, Cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. Here we have Jesus, the true tree of life, hanging on a cross. Once he dies, a Roman soldier takes a spear, stabbing it into his flesh, which represents the veil of the temple where the high priest went on the Day of Atonement, into the presence of God on the Ark of the Covenant. The spear, I believe, severed the arteries coming from the top of the heart. These arteries are like stems, holding the fruit, or heart, in place. The fruit was plucked from the tree. Now available to the bride of Christ is the river of life, or Jesus' blood, through faith. Exodus chapter 17. Remember when Moses struck the rock at Horeb, outflowed water for the people of Israel? This rock was discovered in 1992 by Jim and Penny Caldwell. It has the appearance of a set of lungs, and in the middle is a rock like a heart, with the top blown off. They said it looked like water came from the bottom up. That's the pathway blood flows to the body. We know Jesus is the rock, stricken for us, and from his side, blood and water came forth. How do you kill a serpent? In Isaiah 14, Lucifer, the light bearer, or illuminated one, like the third eye symbol, wants to ascend above and be like God. Christ is said to be the head of the church. The church is the body, and what good is a body without a head? Christ came to save the body by crushing Satan's head, where the tree of knowledge and self-works is. Then Jesus can become the head and lead the body by faith. Remember when David killed Goliath? Goliath was covered in armor like the scales of a serpent. David, by faith, slung a stone to the forehead of Goliath. Then he took Goliath's sword and cut off his head. The serpent was dead. David later became the head of Israel. He is a type of Jesus. It is your choice. Which tree will you choose? Life or death? Faith or works?